Ike and Don, Ike and Donnie. Wait, let me say that again because I'm not sure if I was recording when I said that. Ike and Don, Ike and Donnie. Basically, Eisenhower and Trump, Dwight Eisenhower and Donald Trump, were very similar presidents. Now, right off the bat, obviously, Dwight Eisenhower did not incite an insurrection. He did not try to overthrow domestic democracy. So they're very different in that way. And of course, Dwight Eisenhower was actually a war hero in World War II, whereas Donald Trump dodged the draft and because, bone spurs and everything. Point is, Eisenhower and Trump were still very similar. How, you might ask? First and foremost, on foreign policy, I mean, Kyle Klinsky pronounces it foreign policy, but some people pronounce it foreign policy. Yeah, point is, yeah, I don't know why this new, okay, sorry, something popped up on my computer and it's really bugging me. Okay, got it, got rid of it. The point is, Dwight Eisenhower overthrew the government of Iran. Dwight Eisenhower overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mosadeggh because he wanted to exploit because Dwight Eisenhower wanted to exploit Iran's oil and Prime Minister Mosaddegh wanted to protect Iran's oil. So Dwight Eisenhower overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh, and Dwight Eisenhower installed the U.S.-backed dictator, the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who proceeded to allow the United States and Britain to exploit Iran's oil and natural resources. And in turn, the Shah oppressed his own people, the Iranian people. So Dwight Eisenhower overthrew the Iranian government and installed a dictatorship. Donald Trump pulled out of the peace deal with Iran, pulled out of the nuclear deal with Iran, and Donald Trump assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Donald Trump sanctioned food and medicine going into Iran. So basically, their Iran policy very similar. Ike Eisenhower overthrew the Iranian government and installed a dictatorship. Trump tried to provoke Iran to war by assassinating one of the generals and sanctioning food and medicine. So on that one, very similar. On Korea, Dwight Eisenhower pretended he was going to actually get full peace, and he framed it that way and continued to frame it that way. But really, what Dwight Eisenhower did was he, first of all, threatened to nuke Korea, which was horribly insane and absolutely terrible. And then Dwight Eisenhower proceeded to do an armistice, and it's good. Stopping fighting is good. But what he did was, thanks to him, thanks to Dwight Eisenhower, the U.S. military is still in South Korea. U.S. military is still occupying South Korea to this day. And Donald Trump, because the war never officially ended, because it was just an armistice, there was no peaceful declaration to the war. And even though many progressive South Korean presidents like Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, and current President Moon Jae-in have tried to get peace with North Korea, they've been basically handicapped and stopped by U.S. presidents along the way, U.S. presidents such as George W. Bush, very big culprit in this. But the point is, Donald Trump, what did he do in Korea? Well, first of all, he tried to extort South Korea into paying even more money for the U.S. military occupation. And also Donald Trump initially threatened to nuke and do nuclear war and horrible things with North Korea. And Donald Trump, after escalating tensions, he did sit down and do some diplomacy and negotiation with North Korea, but he didn't really change any of the policy. So he did not lift any sanctions. To his credit, Trump did suspend military exercises for a time, provocative military exercises, Trump mainly listened to John Bolton, who helped sabotage North Korea diplomacy talks, and Donald Trump did not lift sanctions, did not change any of the real policies, and he kept the troops in South Korea, even though he kept talking about how he would get them out, but he never got them out. And so basically with Donald Trump, you just had continuation of the status quo with North Korea, even though he didn't take advantage of the fact that they were doing negotiations. He didn't do anything substantive policy-wise with them. So that's another similarity there. And with other foreign policy, so Donald Trump might have tried to do a coup in Venezuela, who knows? But he might have tried to overthrow Nicolas Maduro. Donald Trump also supposedly wanted to take out Bashar al-Assad of Syria. So horrible attempting to do coups and all that. Dwight Eisenhower literally did a coup in Guatemala. He overthrew the Guatemala government, and Dwight Eisenhower started U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Dwight Eisenhower also did terror campaigns in Indonesia. Donald Trump aided and abetted a genocide in Yemen because Saudi Arabians paid him money, and so he gave them weapons for their genocide. And so Donald Trump aided and abetted genocide in Yemen, Saudi Arabian genocide in Yemen. Basically, you have many similarities in terms of foreign policy. Horrible stuff. And of course, both Eisenhower and Trump did the fake anti war, I'm for peace stuff. Dwight Eisenhower, on his very last day in office after having been president for 8 years, gave a speech calling out the military industrial complex. When he had been actively doing their bidding for 8 years, Donald Trump would constantly complain about the deep state, and he would constantly complain about the wars and pretend he was anti-war. And even in one speech, he actually criticized the military-industrial complex, but he did the bidding of the military-industrial complex and the what he referred to as the deep state for years and for 4 years, because he did all their foreign policy and all the horrible foreign policy that they wanted. So Eisenhower and Trump totally cucked and served the military-industrial complex, but occasionally criticized them. So it's all good because the words matter and not the policy. No, policies matter, not the words. Like, people get it together. Additionally, Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 was running for president, and he had been atheist for pretty much his entire adult life, but he converted religion. He converted his religion during a presidential election because his spiritual advisor, Billy Graham, told him to. Billy Graham said, hey, Dwight Eisenhower, people don't like the fact that you're not Christian, so why don't you just convert to Christianity? And Dwight Eisenhower's like, okay. And so Dwight Eisenhower supposedly converted to Christianity during a presidential election year, and he got baptized after he became president, and he held public prayers before cabinet meetings. And you know how in the Pledge of Allegiance it says one nation under God? The under God part, the part that says under God, that was added by Dwight Eisenhower. It wasn't there before. So basically, Dwight Eisenhower muddied the separation between church and state, all because he wanted to pander. And of course, he brought in the religious right. Dwight Eisenhower legitimized the evangelicals, the religious right, and brought them into national politics. He made Billy Graham his spiritual advisor to the president. That's horrible stuff. Donald Trump also pandered heavily to the evangelicals, the religious right, and he threw them every single bone they wanted and every single culture war nonsense that they wanted. And so he also had been pretty much atheist for his entire adult life, but supposedly converted on the campaign trail in 2015, 2016. He was very close with Franklin Graham and Jerry Falwell Jr. Very interesting stuff about Jerry Falwell Jr. these days, by the way, but that's beside the point. And Donald Trump brought in the religious right even further on the national politics stage, and he gave them everything they wanted. Donald Trump did public prayers before cabinet meetings, had Ben Carson, psycho Ben Carson, lead the prayers. By the way, I mean, I'm getting a little more loose and using more words during YouTube, on my YouTube videos, so maybe they'll punish me with the algorithm or something. I don't really care because I'm not getting no views, so the point is subscribe and share and view and let my channel grow bigger. Anyway, that was me self-serving, but the point is me serving myself and being selfish, but by promoting my YouTube channel. But the point is, Eisenhower and Trump were very selfish and self-serving when they pandered and really blew whistles to the evangelical religious right and used them to solidify their base and get them into the national politics scene and give them everything they want. Now, the founders of the country, the so-called founding fathers, they were mostly horrible people who owned slaves and did a lot of bad things. But the one thing that they did do well was say that there should be separation between church and state. In fact, Thomas Jefferson was actually not even Christian. He hated the he would stab the Bible, rip out pages, rip out the Gospels because he didn't believe in Jesus. And of course, Thomas Jefferson was a horrible person otherwise because he assaulted Sally Hemings, and that's putting it nicely because he did really some really bad things to Sally Hemings and lots of other horrible things as well. But the I will give the founders credit for saying separation of church and state because that's a very basic common sense good thing. Even though they were horrible in other aspects, the founders were, but it's good that they put separation of church and state in there. But thanks to people like Eisenhower and Trump, that separation of church and state has been massively muddied and horrible. Now, in domestic issues, of course, Trump was slightly worse than Eisenhower in that Eisenhower packed his cabinet with corporate executives, as did Trump. But with Eisenhower, he was in an era where the New Deal had recently been implemented by Roosevelt and Truman, FDR and Harry S. Truman, and so Eisenhower had to tread carefully so he couldn't publicly oppose the New Deal programs because that would be political suicide, and it would make him unpopular with the people. And so Eisenhower had the corporate executives slow down the New Deal programs because the New Deal was a progressive program that was supposed to build. And so Eisenhower clever in a bad way, had the corporate executives really put their foot down and slow down the New Deal programs and make sure that they didn't get any better, but just stayed in place, and maybe they would get an opportunity to undo the programs over time. Whereas Donald Trump took money from the predatory payday loan industry, gave them everything they wanted, destroyed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, did a massive tax cut for the rich, where 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Donald Trump did more and more deregulation. And yes, but so domestically they were backwards. Now we can go through like literally every single policy. Oh yes, and Donald Trump worsened relations with Cuba, destroyed, sanctioned them, embargo, horrible stuff. Dwight Eisenhower laid out the foundation for the Bay of Pigs invasion, which happened under JFK, but Dwight Eisenhower laid out the foundation for the attempted regime change in Cuba. Now, yeah, I'm trying to think through all the policies, and I probably will miss some of them and won't get to all of them. But you can see how Ike and Donald Trump and Dwight Eisenhower were very similar to each other. And the overall arching theme, the main point I want to make here is there is horrible rehabilitation of the Republican Party. And we see that mainly with George W. Bush because he was one of the more recent Republican presidents, but it's really being applied to every other Republican president as well. And there is the perception that Dwight Eisenhower was a good guy because he spoke out against the military industrial complex on, as I said, his last day in office after being in office for 8 years. And of course, 90% marginal tax rate, but they won't mention that the corporate executives were really running the country and working to dismantle the New Deal over time. So there's a rehabilitation of Dwight Eisenhower, how the Republican Party was supposedly sane under Dwight Eisenhower, even though he's the one who brought the evangelicals into the spotlight and gave them legitimacy and power. So stop rehabilitating Dwight Eisenhower, and of course stop rehabilitating George W. Bush and anyone else who's crazy like Donald J. Trump. And we can't have this, we need a strong Republican Party. Republican Party needs to go back to where it was before nonsense, because that rehabilitation only serves to legitimize them and their policies moving forward. Like, when do you want to bring the Republican Party back to? 1953, when they were overthrowing the government of Iran? Do you want to bring them back to 1923, when they were cutting taxes for the wealthy, destroying unions, and deregulating the economy? Do you want to bring them back to 1882 when they were doing the xenophobic Chinese Exclusion Act? Do you want to bring the Republican Party back to 1893 when they overthrew the government of Hawaii? When they overthrew Queen Leokalani? Do you want to bring the Republican Party back to 1899, when into the late 19th century, when they were doing an illegal war with Spain, when they were manufacturing consent to propagandize the American people into supporting a war with Spain, a war in which the United States annexed Puerto Rico and invaded the Philippines and put their civilians in internment camps and massacred a whole bunch of their civilians. Like, when do you want to bring the Republican Party back to? Do you want to bring the Republican Party back to the days of Richard Nixon when they overthrew the government of Chile and did a genocide in Cambodia and fully integrated the racist Southerners into the Republican Party? Like, seriously, when do you want to bring the Republican Party back to? If you want to say, well, we want to bring the Republican Party back to 1861 when, or 1865 when Abraham Lincoln was president, or 1869 when Ulysses Grant was president and they were fighting for civil rights. And like, if you say that, if you say you want to bring the Republican Party back to like 1870 or something like that, then I understand. Then of course I agree. But come on, the Republican Party has been gone and dead for a figuratively dead in that their policies are rotten. They've been horrible for an exceedingly long time, and it's time you realize that because, first of all, and even people who rightfully criticize the Republican Party, lots of great progressives who criticize the Republican Party. Uh, Obviously, Kyle Kulinski is wonderful progressive, and so is the Young Turks, Farron Cousins, and everyone else. The point is, they always point out how the rot was going on with Ronald Reagan. But the thing is, it was going on even before that. Ronald Reagan, much like Donald Trump, was the symptom, not the cause. Ronald Reagan was the culmination of years and years of horrible Republican policies. Ronald Reagan was horrible. We also have to remember Richard Nixon, who came before him, and Dwight Eisenhower came before him, and Herbert Hoover, who came before him, and Calvin Coolidge, who came before him, and Warren Harding, who came before him. The point is, I know I say the point is a lot, but really the point, obviously it's a bad habit that I say the point is a lot, but the point is the policy, the policy, the policy. And policies are very important, and you have to understand history because that's how you know the policies and what policies have failed and what policies have worked and what policies are wrong and what policies are right. And one last thing about the Eisenhower-Trump comparison, there's a cult of personality around Donald Trump with the whole MAGA psycho thing and horrible stuff and the rallies and all that. And everyone knows, so I don't have to really go into detail and explain that disgusting stuff. There was also a cult of personality around Dwight Eisenhower. He was a World War hero from World War II and very well respected. So they used that cult of personality to essentially put him in office and make him president. And there was not much discussion on policies themselves. And as I mentioned, his policies were massively horrible. So don't form. So my second point is don't form cults of personality around certain personalities or certain people or certain whatever. Focus on the policies because that's what really matters.